Well, hello, I'm Doug Apple, back with another special interview for you today. And the other day, my son gave me a book that he got from the library that was written by a Florida State professor about marriage. And it was really more of an educational tome. It was not very, I said the word accessible. It's not very accessible. I mean, some of his paragraphs seemed to run on for pages, so it was hard to really read. But he was talking about marriage, and I couldn't even really see if he was making a particular point about marriage, other than he did mention this. He said, of all the people who've tried to change marriage and kill marriage and do away with marriage and call marriage old-fashioned, he said, still to this very day, marriage is the only game in town. Now, I'm not sure exactly what he even meant by that when he said it, but I did laugh when I read that because I thought, this is God's plan. One man, one woman, get married, stay together till death do you part, be fruitful and multiply. This is the typical family idea, right? Well, a lot of people are still trying to do away with it or change it or throw it out as old-fashioned or say that you're a religious, crazy Bible thumper if you try to say, no, you need to get married. No, one man, one woman for life and have children. Well, we're going to talk about this with Mike Sharman. He is the general counsel for Share Healthcare, and we'll talk a little bit about Share Healthcare in a little bit. But the headlines are talking about some of these things, including the New York Times, Mike. So let's dive into this subject about marriage and fertility rates and mental health, etc.
Well, I think the bottom line why those three articles tie together is when we try to reinvent God's law, bad things happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the drop in the fertility rate. That means the drop in the rate by which we are reproducing ourselves. And so here in the United States, we've had just 53.1 live births for every 1,000 women in 2025. That's just a slight decrease from the year before, but that had a slight decrease from the year before, which had a slight decrease from the year before. And so since 2000, we've been dropping our fertility rates. In the United States, we no longer have the ability to replace ourselves by normal population growth. It's just not occurring. And we need to be doing that for a number of reasons. And one of them is what happens when you get older. Now, let's jump over for just a moment to marriage, because that ties into it. We have much less people getting married now. Well, in 2023, which is the last year of the total available data, there were 111 million single adults in the U.S. Well, in 1990, 33 years before, one generation before, there were only 70 million. So that's a huge percentage increase, a huge numeric increase of single people. Well, why did I switch right from the fertility to marriage? Well, one thing that I chat with people when they're talking about marriage or divorce really often, I'll say, well, what do you want when you're on your final illness? Who do you want by your bedside? What if you have no one? Because you never married, or because you divorced the only stable relationship you had, which distanced you from your children. Who do you want by your bedside when you're on your final illness? Or who do you want at your bedside when it's not your final illness, but you need somebody to encourage you, take care of you, maybe take you home and watch for you while you're convalescing? There's only so many friends who are going to hang out with you for a month doing that type of thing, or months, as the case may be. And then I ask people also, if you're able to look down from heaven, or just as you imagine it, who do you want at your graveside? Do you want just you in the coffin, the person who's officiating the funeral, and the guys who are waiting to be able to put the dirt back on? I mean, that's what happens with these many more people who are just deciding, I never want to marry. which is a very large increase that we're having now. And that ties into, of course, the fertility. Now, a number of single people do intentionally choose to have children. Others unintentionally wind up with them. But the best situation, and the one that makes the most sense, is to be married and to be able to have a mother and father, husband and wife, to be able to support the child and children emotionally, physically, financially, all those ways. You just need stability. And children need three things: security, stability, tradition. I mean, that's what kids want and need to be able to grow well. You wouldn't keep transplanting a plant from pot to pot to pot to pot to pot, moving it inside, outside, and think that it's going to do well. Children need security, stability, and tradition so that their roots can go deep, so that they can have a solid future. We see what happens when we try to make up our own minds about how we are to deal with our sexuality, how we are to deal with our sexual urges, how we're to do with our self-identity, when we look at this new study that came out about transgenders. Now, the study was done in Finland with a very large amount of people, 2,100 people, and it was over 25 years of data. So, a long study, a large study in a nation that doesn't have any particular social bias against transgendering. In fact, they have an office, I can't remember the name of it, but something like the Office of Gender Transitions. The office is Gender Identity Services. So there's not a bias there. And yet that study found that adolescents who had been wondering who they are, having that gender dysphoria, showed, the study says, significantly higher psychiatric morbidity both before and after they went to their gender clinics than do, other people of that same age. It gets worse. We had heard the cliche, I guess, that was told parents and children who are wondering about transition or wondering about their sexual identity. Well, if you don't let them switch, you're going to have a dead daughter as opposed to a live son, or you're going to have a dead son as opposed to a live daughter. Mm-hmm. Well, the opposite is actually true. 46% of the people who went to the gender clinic had some sort of psychiatric problem before they went. Okay, that sort of makes sense. Well, they don't get better. 2 years after they went to the gender clinic, 62% were still having mental health problems. So it had increased significantly. And it went from a 10% of follow-up care on those who had the medicalized gender transition, meaning they did something either surgically or chemically. It went for further psychiatric treatment, from up to 61% for the male to female transitioners and 55% for the female to male. And that doubled or quadrupled those needs. The gender dysphoric girls, this survey said, were 3 times as likely to need additional psychiatric treatment compared to their peers. And then gender dysphoric boys were 5 times higher needing future psychiatric care.
Well, let me just point out that that's important. I mean, people can connect the dots, but it's important because they offer these transgender transitions as the solution to their problem.
Exactly. And they're wrong. And if they were people who had a biblical worldview, they would have known before they started that this was wrong, so don't do it. We know God created them male and female, he created them. And that's it. And he created them with a specific identity for them. That's that. And if we are going to reinvent God's law, we know necessarily that rebellion, that decision that we can be as God, is going to wind up negatively. All right, getting back to some of the other articles that we're looking at today, God tells us to be fruitful and multiply. Well, if we're trying to be God ourselves and decide, I don't want children, I'm not going to have children. I am going to be sexually active, but I'm not going to have any children as a result. Well, you're not being fruitful and multiply. Well, I'm not going to be sexually active and not have any children. I'm just going to be celibate for the rest of my life and not have any children. Well, you're not being fruitful and multiplying. God had said specifically in Scripture that the reason he wanted marriage, a good biblical marriage, a godly marriage, I think is the phrase, is because he wanted godly children. We need marriage, an intact, committed relationship, to be able to give the stability, security, and tradition that children need, and to be able to pass on, as just a natural consequence of growing up, pass on our faith, our awe of God, our reverence of God, and our worship of God.
Yeah,
when we don't, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think about, if somebody doesn't marry, doesn't have children, then they're never a grandparent, they're never a great grandparent. Actually, the whole family tree ends with them.
And so does our economy.
That's true.
When you look at the amount of abortions and the reduced fertility, think how many shoe factories have closed. Think how many schools in small towns have closed. Think of how many taxpayers there aren't. Both Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid rely upon the premise that we're having more people coming into the economy and being productive than we are people who are dependent upon the wage holders for Social Security and Medicare. But that's just fast becoming not true. In 2024, 18% of the American population were retired. 18%. That's right at 1/5. Well, that means 4 people are having to support one other person on both Medicare and Social Security. Financially, that doesn't work. But if you have a family structure, you're going to be having more people that can have inputs into that. Instead of needing the medical transport to take somebody to a doctor, which Medicare, Medicaid would be paying for depending on what it is, you have a family member take you. Instead of having to go to a step-down facility, a rehab facility, when you get out of the hospital because you have nobody at home to take care of you, you would have somebody at home to take care of you. I mean, on and on and on. Our economy depends on a good marriage structure, a good family structure. When we don't have that, we're going to have so many more social pathologies that cost us money or don't make us money. I mean, we can look at it biblically. God said to, restrain our sexual urges within marriage, so that within marriage we can be fruitful and multiply. We can have that stability and security. God told us He's made us male and female. Don't mess around with that formula. Okay, when we have that, things work out well, even though we're still in a sin-drenched world and we still are inherently selfish. But if we're allowing the Holy Spirit to come out, then we can be trying to conquer that urge over and over and over and think of the others, our marriage partner, our children, what we're leaving to posterity, our duty to God, etc. But when we think we can create it all, we are the ones and the only ones on the throne, we don't even have a king or queen on the throne next to us, it's going to get messed up. And that's what we are seeing right now. When you have people who are selfish and don't want to marry because they will tell you, I don't want to marry because I don't want to have to share, I don't want to compromise, I want to win every argument. And I mean, you look at these articles, that's what people are saying. Then you're going to be having a selfish citizen. Mm-hmm. You're going to be having a person with their hand out to the government all the time saying, I demand this, you owe me this. And politicians who want to get reelected have a strong tendency to then give it.
Well, in light of these things, what is our part? What's the solution?
Our solution is to look at Scripture and follow it. For ourselves, we want to be in self-control. And if we don't have self-control, ask God to take control, and He will. He'll prompt you, and let's say somebody has just a real strong sexual urge and they're heterosexual and they're not married. ask God to take control, and he will. Ask him to help you hold those waters of your sexual urges in a calm pond, a calm lake, until you do find somebody that you can marry. And then you can have your roaring waterfall, whatever metaphor you want to be. And that's what he wants us to have, so that we can be fruitful and multiply. I've mentioned sexuality and sexual urges a lot because guess what? That started in the garden and it's continued ever since. And God uses the metaphor of the bridegroom and his bride because he wants us to understand there is joy in that matching. There is joy in two becoming one. And we want it to be that way. We don't want it to be dulcetory. We don't want it to be destructive. We want it to have joy. And when you know that you're not going to have shame and embarrassment over it because you're building a life with that person as opposed to trying to remember what their name is the next morning, or you have nothing. We need to just be able to have self-control so that we can have true joy. When you're in a marriage and you begin looking over the fence, go back to the 10th commandment and don't covet other people's anything, because guess what? You're only seeing what looks really good on the outside. You're not seeing the day-to-day problems on the inside. And if each person in the marriage just works on dealing with their own character flaws, they're going to have a great marriage. And they're going to be, at the end of their lives, much happier than if they hadn't done that. And we see within Share Healthcare, you introduced me as the general counsel of that, we see some of the fruit of that in Share Healthcare. We're a Christian organization composed of Christians who are wanting to share the medically necessary medical expenses of one another. And we define marriage within our guidelines as, a marriage between a man and a woman. And whether we have singles, couples, or families in it, they're all avowed Christians, having attested to just the classic Christianity in our application, our guidelines. So the people who want to do God's law. Now, that doesn't mean we're all perfect, because we're not, can't be. But it means we are striving toward that. So we see the blessing that God has for people who are wanting to live out the lives in accordance with him. They know that male is male, female is female. They know that the marriage is the proper place to be fruitful and multiplying, and you can. So in the fruitful and multiply category, our family, the cost for a family per month is $349 per month. But the cost for a family of four nationwide, the average, is $2,684. Well, we can see right there the blessing. Our family of four is $349. The world's $340. The nation in the secular world, their family of four is $2,684. It is self-evident, it's clear that when we follow God's law, when we try to live our lives in accordance with it, good things happen. We don't share in abortions because we think we're supposed to be fruitful and multiplying. We don't share in abortifacients for the same reason. We don't share in transgendering operations or chemical anything on that because we know God made them male and female. And whatever struggle we have within that, we know that God is with us. He is Emmanuel, and he will work through those struggles with us. So for a single, we're $149 per month. For a couple, we're $249. And for that family of four that I mentioned, we're $349. It works when we allow God to work in our lives, and we get in the yoke with him.
I heard this, and I can't remember where I heard it, but I don't know if it was C.S. Lewis or just a poet. It's a poetic vision, really, but it pictures Jesus walking along on just a barren, dry land, and in every place he leaves his footprint, grass begins to grow. Mm. And it's like a poetic vision, but I've always liked that because I feel like everywhere Jesus goes, life springs up. Mm-hmm. And when we do things according to God's plan, you submit your life to God and his plan. You submit your marriage, then your parenting. You just submit your career, your money, your gifts to God. then life just springs forth. And then after you do that for several years, you can look back across your life. And I look back across my life, and every area where I've done this, where I've submitted it to God, I just see it's like a garden. It's just life springing up everywhere, including 16 grandkids. So it's, you just look and it's just vibrant and full of joy. And I think, what if I'd have decided to not get married, not have children, just to focus on a career and, make some money, enjoy myself, have some good times, go out every Friday night, whatever it might be. And I look back and I think that would have been so shallow and lacking the life, but you can't really see it until you get to this side of it and you look back and you're like, wow, God did that.
And that's the blessing. And you gave a great numeric example of being fruitful and multiply. You and your wife, there were 2. Now there's 16 plus the children who had those children.
Mm-hmm.
We have some friends who had many children, and their latest grandson, his middle name is Centurion because he's the 100th. Children, grandchildren, and in-laws they have.
Wow.
Right. They were fruitful and multiplied, and I know many of those, the children, I don't know many of the grandchildren, but they're all just nice, sweet, committed people.
So you don't know all 100 of them?
No, I don't. I wonder if the couple that began all that could remember their names as they write out Christmas cards or whatever.
That's a lot of names. That'd be hard to remember.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if people want to find out more about Share Healthcare, what's their next step?
Well, the next step probably is go to our website. Remember our name, Share Healthcare, and go to our website, sharehealthcare.com. Look around there, rummage around, hit on each one of the tabs, write down your questions as you go, and then call 1-844-SHARE-HC, 1-844-SHARE-HC, and a person on the other end will be glad to help you with your questions.
All right. Again, 1-844-SHARE-HC or sharehealthcare.com. That's Mike Sharman, and for Wave 94, I'm Doug Apple.